Evan first contacted me on a bitterly cold December night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., with an email so unsettling that I genuinely thought someone was playing a sick joke on me, but the trembling voice in the attached audio and the timestamps embedded in the metadata proved otherwise, and I knew instantly that this wasn't the typical hoax I sometimes receive from horror fans. This was something real, something dangerous, something that felt like it had already chosen him long before he ever realized it. The subject line of his email read, "I think the box wants me dead," and those 7 words alone triggered a crawling sensation up my spine, not because it sounded dramatic, but because it felt like the desperate, exhausted confession of a man who had already accepted that whatever he was dealing with had become stronger than him. Evan introduced himself as a 32-year-old furniture collector from Independence, Missouri, someone who regularly bought antiques from online auctions, estate sales, and private eBay sellers. He said he had found my website after searching for paranormal documenters outside Missouri, insisting he needed someone far enough away that it couldn't reach me through him. Those were his exact words, and at first I didn't understand what he meant, until much later. He explained that on November 3, 2001, he purchased what the seller listed as an old Jewish wine cabinet, estate piece, rare, from an eBay account that had been active for only 15 days. The description seemed harmless, even boring, but at the very bottom of the listing, hidden in tiny faded gray letters, was a line that said, "Not responsible for spiritual consequences." Evan admitted he didn't even notice that line until 2 weeks after the box arrived and the strange incidents began. The moment he opened the package, he felt an odd heaviness around it, a pressure in the air, as if something inside the wooden chest absorbed the light in the room, making the corners of his apartment slightly darker. The box smelled faintly of old wine at first, sweet, aged, almost nostalgic, yet it made the back of his throat itch, like breathing fumes that didn't belong in a home. He placed the box on top of the tall bookshelf across from his bed and didn't think about it again until that same night around 3:33 a.m. when a soft, deliberate tapping sound woke him from a deep sleep. At first he thought the noise came from the wall, maybe a pipe or a settling beam, but when he sat up, the tapping repeated, 3 taps, evenly spaced, unmistakably coming from inside the box. He froze in bed, listening, not daring to move, and after nearly a minute of silence, he convinced himself he imagined it and eventually fell asleep. But the next morning, he found the box slightly rotated, not much, maybe a few centimeters, but enough that he knew he hadn't left it like that. By the 3rd night the tapping grew louder, sharper, almost irritated, and the smell of wine had transformed into a sour, rotten grape stench that lingered even after he opened windows. On the 4th night, he experienced his first dream, the one he described in shaky detail in his email to me. He dreamed of a woman crying, but her cry didn't sound human. It was wet, muffled, almost like someone screaming with their mouth full of liquid. He could only see her hands pressing against the inside of a wooden box lid, long thin fingers trembling violently as they clawed for escape. When he woke up drenched in sweat, he saw that the box had shifted again, now angled slightly open, though he swore he had never touched the latch. He tried to convince himself he had left it loose, that he simply forgot securing it properly, but his instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. Nights 5 through 7 became progressively worse. The tapping grew rhythmic, almost intelligent, and he started hearing faint whispers in a language he didn't recognize, drifting from the box like distant chanting. The temperature in his bedroom dropped noticeably every night after 3 a.m., cold enough that he could see his breath in the dark. By the 8th night, Evan's fear became so intense that he began sleeping on the couch in the living room, leaving every light in the apartment turned on, but even there he felt watched. He reported hearing footsteps pacing slowly across the wooden floor in his bedroom even though the door was closed. The real breaking point came on night 9 when he woke to someone whispering his full name, softly but clearly, right beside his ear, as if their lips were nearly touching his skin. He turned on the lamp in a panic, heart racing, and his eyes immediately locked onto the tall, black, human-shaped silhouette standing perfectly still in the corner of the room near the bookshelf. The figure didn't move. It didn't breathe. Its head was tilted slightly, as if studying him with unsettling curiosity. The moment he blinked, it vanished as if it had never been there, but the box, this time, was fully open. Evan finally grabbed the courage to look inside. Instead of emptiness, he found items that made no sense: a strand of black hair tied with red thread, a dried rose crushed flat, a tarnished silver coin, and a child's crudely drawn picture of a hollow-eyed woman with her mouth stitched shut. He slammed the lid shut immediately, heart pounding violently. The next morning he contacted the eBay seller, but the account had been deleted, the phone number disconnected, and the shipping address traced back to an abandoned building undergoing demolition. Evan swore to me that at this moment, when all connections to the box vanished, he realized he had unknowingly brought something into his home that wasn't just haunted, but attached. He ended his first email with a final line that still echoes in my head: "I don't think the box came to me by accident. I think it was delivered." Evan's second email arrived only 12 hours after the first, sent at 3:41 a.m., and unlike the calm, structured message he had written earlier, this one felt frantic, rushed, almost like he was typing while something stared at him from across the room. He began by telling me that after sending his first email, the activity inside his apartment escalated in a way he could no longer dismiss as dreams, imagination, or sleep paralysis, because now the thing inside the Dybbuk box wasn't just making noises, it was learning him, studying him, responding to him. He explained that the night after he found the strange items inside the box, he moved it to the hallway closet, thinking that putting distance between himself and the object would help him sleep, but at 3:33 a.m., he woke to the unmistakable creak of the closet door slowly opening by itself, followed by the soft, deliberate scrape of wood sliding across the floor. Too terrified to leave the couch where he slept, he pulled the blanket to his chin and held his breath, listening as something dragged itself out of the closet, inch by inch, as if pulling weight it didn't fully control. When he finally gathered enough courage to look, the box was sitting in the center of the living room floor, open again, the items inside arranged differently, almost ritualistically, a triangle shape formed by the coin, the dried rose, and the hair. Evan wrote that he refused to touch anything and instead stepped outside to breathe fresh air, but when he returned only minutes later, the box had moved again, now sitting on the couch where he had been sleeping. He said he could no longer deny it: something was manipulating the object intentionally, purposefully. The next night, after barely sleeping, he woke suddenly to the sound of someone whispering behind him in a voice that was not human, not even close. The voice was low, vibrating, thick, like someone drowning while trying to speak. At first it spoke a language he couldn't understand, but then, horrifyingly, the voice repeated his name, first incorrectly, then slightly better, then in a perfect imitation of his own voice. He turned around expecting to see an intruder, but all he saw was the dark hallway leading to his bedroom. The whispering didn't come from a figure this time, it came from the open box. That was the night he decided he could no longer stay in the apartment. He packed a duffel bag, grabbed his keys, and left, checking into a cheap motel in Blue Springs. For one night, things were quiet. He slept for nearly 6 hours without interruption, something he hadn't experienced in almost 2 weeks. But around 4:12 a.m., he woke to a loud bang on the motel door, 3 heavy knocks, evenly spaced. When he didn't answer, the knocks repeated, louder. He froze, too afraid to move, and after nearly a minute, whoever, or whatever, was outside dragged something heavy along the concrete walkway, leaving a long scraping echo that faded into silence. When morning came, Evan opened the door cautiously. No one was outside, but directly in front of his door was the silver coin from the Dybbuk box, placed perfectly centered on the doormat. Terrified, Evan drove back to his apartment, hoping to find the box exactly where he left it, but when he unlocked the door and stepped inside, he found the box sitting in the middle of the kitchen counter, although he swore he never put it there. This time, his fear pushed him to seek help. He began calling synagogues across Missouri, leaving messages explaining the situation until finally, a rabbi from Kansas City returned his call and asked him to bring the box immediately but warned him not to touch anything inside it. Evan wrapped the box in a thick blanket, shoved it into his car trunk, and drove the 40 minutes to the rabbi's small office attached to a local community center. The moment the rabbi saw the box, he refused to touch it. He didn't even come closer than a few feet. He simply whispered a prayer under his breath. Asked Evan where he got it. When Evan explained the eBay purchase, the rabbi's expression changed completely. He looked terrified, genuinely terrified, and told Evan that objects like this were never supposed to be sold casually, that they were sealed for a reason. He said the items inside the box were anchors, physical tethers used by a trapped or fragmented spirit to maintain presence in the human world. He also said something chilling: if it's mimicking your voice, it's no longer just attached. It's familiarizing itself with you. That means it's feeding. The rabbi then instructed Evan to bury the box, but not destroy it. Destroying the vessel would free the occupant without direction, something far worse. He told Evan to bury it somewhere peaceful, somewhere it couldn't be easily found. Evan chose a quiet, forested area near a trailhead by Blue Springs Lake. He dug a shallow hole, placed the wrapped box inside, whispered an apology even though he didn't know why, and covered it with dirt. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, he felt relief. He drove home that night believing the nightmare was finally over. But at 3:33 a.m., he woke to the unmistakable sound of splintering wood. He turned on his lamp and felt his blood run cold. The box was sitting at the foot of his bed, covered in fresh soil, cracked open, and reeking of fermented grapes. And something inside it was breathing. Evan's third email reached me at 5:12 a.m., though from the chaotic, disjointed way he typed, I suspected he hadn't slept in days. He began by admitting he had no memory of how he got back into his bedroom after burying the box, no memory of unlocking his front door, no memory of walking to the bed, and he wrote that the most horrifying part was that he woke up sitting upright, his back perfectly straight, hands resting on his knees like someone had posed him that way. He said the smell of rotten grapes was so thick in the room that it made his eyes water, and when his vision cleared, he saw, in the dim yellow glow of his bedside lamp, the Dybbuk box resting only inches from his feet. Dirt clung to its wooden surface, packed into the cracks, smeared across the latch as if it had crawled out of the earth by itself. The lid was broken at the corner, splintered inward, as though something inside had pushed with immense force to escape. Evan wrote that in the moments after he woke, the room felt heavy, oppressive, like the air itself resisted movement. He said he couldn't breathe normally, couldn't think clearly, as if something unseen pressed a cold hand against his skull. Then he heard it, the slow, rhythmic breathing coming from inside the box, wet and uneven, like someone gasping through thick liquid. Terrified beyond comprehension, he stumbled backward off the bed, crawling toward the hallway, but just as he reached the door, the box slid an inch across the floorboards, not violently, not loudly, but slowly, deliberately, as if whatever controlled it wanted him to know he wasn't leaving. He managed to stand, sprinted out of the bedroom, grabbed his car keys, and fled the apartment barefoot. He didn't care about the cold November pavement or the broken glass he stepped on while running, he just wanted to get as far from the box as possible. He drove aimlessly for nearly an hour before parking at a 24-hour Walmart in Lee Summit, where he sat trembling in his car until sunrise. At 7:41 a.m., he called the rabbi. The rabbi answered on the first ring. Evan explained everything, including the box returning from the burial site, the breathing, the scratches on his bedroom wall, and the dreams that now woke him with his throat burning as if filled with wine. The rabbi wasn't surprised. Instead, he asked a chilling question: when it stood in your room that first night, did it look at you? Evan felt sick. He admitted that yes, it had looked at him, head tilted, silent, curious. The rabbi let out a long, shaky breath and said, then it has recognized you. It knows you as its host now. He warned Evan that Dybbuk entities, especially those bound to objects through personal items, did not attach randomly, they attached to those whose emotional or spiritual state they could exploit. Evan tried to argue, insisting he wasn't weak, wasn't depressed, wasn't vulnerable, but the rabbi asked something that silenced him. When your mother died last year, did you keep anything of hers you weren't ready to let go of? Evan stopped typing for nearly a minute before writing that yes. he still kept her necklace in his nightstand and couldn't bring himself to put it away, because it was the only thing that still smelled like her perfume. The rabbi explained that grief created spiritual openings, invisible fractures in a person's inner world, and that entities like the one attached to the box could sense those fractures the way animals smell blood. He told Evan to leave the apartment immediately, not because the box was dangerous there, but because Evan himself had become the anchor. The box no longer needed the items inside it, it needed him. Evan booked a room at a cheap roadside motel off I-70 near Grain Valley. He checked in under a fake name, paid in cash, and turned off his phone's location services. For a moment, things seemed calm. He showered, changed clothes, and attempted to rest. But at 2:58 a.m., the room temperature dropped so suddenly that the mirror fogged from the inside out. Evan watched in paralyzed horror as words slowly formed on the glass. "I found you." He scrambled out of the bathroom and nearly slipped on something wet on the floor. When he turned on the light, he saw muddy footprints leading from the motel door to the foot of the bed. The same elongated footprints he had seen back in his apartment. He called the rabbi again, voice cracking with panic, but before he could speak more than a sentence, the rabbi interrupted him, whispering urgently, "Evan, listen to me. You must not acknowledge it anymore. Do not speak to it. Do not look for it. Do not respond." But Evan wasn't listening, because the motel door was shaking violently, rattling in its frame as though someone were trying to break in. 3 knocks echoed. Slow. Measured. Familiar. Evan dropped the phone and backed into the corner as the door handle twisted on its own. He kept repeating, "Please stop, please stop, please stop," but the words only seemed to strengthen the thing outside, because the knocking grew louder, heavier, almost impatient. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Evan waited in suffocating silence for what felt like hours. When he finally gathered the courage to approach the door, he looked through the peephole, and nearly screamed. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was a tall, impossibly thin shadow figure, its limbs stretched unnaturally long, its head tilted with the same curious angle he remembered from his bedroom. It raised one finger slowly and pressed it against where its lips should have been, as if telling him to stay quiet. Then, in a distorted version of Evan's own voice, it whispered through the door, "Come back home." The night after the museum sealed the Dybbuk box inside its reinforced containment chamber, I began receiving emails from the same anonymous man who had first written to me about the cursed object, and each new message grew more frantic, as if he were racing against something inching closer every hour, and the final email, which arrived at 3:11 a.m., contained a detailed account of what happened after the box was moved to the Midwestern Historical Preservation Center in St. Louis, Missouri. According to him, the staff assumed the worst was over once the box left his apartment, but the paranormal activity didn't disappear, it multiplied, spreading like a sickness to anyone who had ever touched, held, or even stood too close to the wooden cabinet. Over the next 8 days, every individual connected to the chain of custody began reporting hallucinations, night paralysis, and the same suffocating sensation of an unseen force pressing on their chest while they slept. The preservation specialist, Margaret Lang, who supervised the intake process, told colleagues that while cataloging the box she heard a woman's voice whispering directly behind her right ear in Yiddish, yet she was alone in the room and the audio recorders captured only static. The second night she emailed the anonymous owner to ask if he had ever felt as though something followed him from room to room, even in daylight, because she kept glimpsing a crouched female figure in the corner of her office, bent at an unnatural angle, with her long black hair covering her face and her hands dragging along the floor. The figure disappeared the moment Margaret turned fully toward it, but she sensed it lingering, exhaling cold air against the back of her neck. Security footage from the museum showed more disturbing anomalies: motion sensors tripped without movement, shadows stretching across hallways with no source of light, and a tall shape resembling a woman-like silhouette crawling along the ceiling above the restricted wing where the box was stored. On the 5th day, a senior curator, Daniel Price, collapsed after screaming that something long, thin, and hungry had wrapped its fingers around his spine. He was admitted to St. Mary's Hospital with inexplicable nerve tremors. By day 6, the box began emitting a faint, rhythmic thumping noise, like knuckles striking wood from the inside, and the entire preservation staff refused to go near the chamber without multiple witnesses present. The anonymous man wrote that he attempted to warn them that the box didn't contain a singular spirit but a fractured remnant of a woman who died violently in Eastern Europe during a pogrom over a century earlier, a woman whose rage and grief had twisted into something desperate, territorial, and predatory. He said the entity never intended to stay locked in the box, it used the box as a nest, a familiar anchor while it fed off fear. The final stage of its manifestation happens when enough emotional energy has accumulated around its presence, and according to him, that threshold had already been reached. On the 7th night, the museum's building-wide alarms triggered at 1:54 a.m., and when authorities arrived, they found the metal containment chamber ripped open from the inside with claw-like gouges carved deep into the steel. The Dybbuk box itself was missing. Floors were covered in a trail of dark powder, later identified as a mix of ancient ash and human hair, forming a path from the containment room to the emergency exit door, where the security camera feed had abruptly cut out. The anonymous owner claimed he immediately fled Missouri and drove west, believing the entity would return to him because he had been the last person to claim the box. However, on the 8th night, while staying in a roadside motel near Wichita, he awoke to the sound of a woman sobbing against his bedroom wall. The crying grew louder, closer, until a handprint appeared on the mirror, slender, smeared, and dripping with a dark substance he later described as wet earth mixed with rot. His final paragraph told me he saw the same woman shadow crouched in the corner of his motel room at dawn, her head tilted sideways as if listening for his heartbeat. She moved toward him on all fours, joints bending in reverse, and whispered, "You took me from my home, and now I take you from yours." He claimed the lights flickered violently, and his reflection in the window showed something perched directly behind him, its mouth stretched unnaturally wide. The email ended with the line, "If you don't hear from me again, don't look for me. She doesn't want witnesses." That was the last message I received. The museum never recovered the Dybbuk box. No one knows where the anonymous owner went. Some believe he disappeared into the Ozarks, others insist he was taken by the entity, consumed or twisted into something that now carries the curse forward. But 2 nights ago, this is the part one haven't told anyone else, I found a small, wooden fragment at my doorstep. The wood grain matched the photos he had emailed me months earlier. And last night, while reviewing his final message again, the lights in my room flickered, and I heard a woman whisper in a language I don't understand directly behind my ear. I don't know if this is a warning or the beginning of something far worse, but I am writing this to you exactly as he sent it to me so that someone else knows the truth. The Dybbuk box was never meant to be opened, never meant to be touched, and whatever escaped it is still moving, slowly, deliberately, toward anyone who dares to speak its name.